Alright, and hello everyone, it is me, Jay Burns, and in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you all how to make this little bracelet right here with the Alpha Loom. So this bracelet here is my square watch design, and I have another watch design, which is just a circle here, and I'll have a link in the description if you would rather make this design, because I honestly prefer this one, it just looks better. But in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to make this particular clock design, and yeah, so to make this you will need an Alpha Loom. You will also need a hook or an alpha comb, but if you do decide to use your alpha comb you will also need your regular hook. So you can either use just your regular hook, or you can use both your alpha comb and your regular hook. I'll be using both in the tutorial. You will also need clips, and unlike most Alpha Loom designs, for this one you will only need 3 clips, because as you can see here at the end I have 3 clips, and there's 3 single chains here for the strap of the watch. Then you will of course need rubber bands, and there are 5 groups. So this first group here, the A bands, they're also known as the strap bands because they are going to be pretty much the wristband part. All these brown bands in the example, that's what this first group is. So I'll be calling them the strap bands in this tutorial. The second group here in the B section, these are the actual clock face. So all the white bands here on the clock, and I'll be calling them the face bands. Then these bands here in the C section here, in the C group, these are going to be the hand bands, and they are going to be, well, the hand here on the clock. Then these bands here in this section, they are going to be the number bands, and they are going to be all the bands on the clock that represent the numbers. And the reason I have even a tutorial for this design is because, as you can see here on my circular one, I could only get 4 different times, which were 12, 3, 6, and 9. But on this watch, I was able to get all 12, so there's all 12 different kind of little times here. Then this last group here, these are the connector bands, and they are used to connect all the single chains here in the wrist band part together, and also connect all the little chains here in the clock together, and you don't end up with a bunch of little single chains. Instead you have one bracelet. So yeah, in the description I'll have the number of each type of band you're going to need to make the clock, and then for A rubber bands I'll have the number of bands you can get in 1 inch or 1 centimeter listed in the description, and you can just figure out how many bands you need. So go ahead and use the pause button so that you can get the supplies you'll need, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Alright, and just before we start, I forgot to mention that the bands that will be representing the numbers on the clock, they're going to be the number bands. But yeah. Also, another thing, the kind of hands here that you see on this clock, I won't be showing you how to make this particular time. I'll be showing you how to make this one here with the 9 o'clock instead of this one. Alright, anyway, if you want to kind of customize what time you have on your clock, then I'll have a link in the description where you can get a template, and you can use the template to figure out how you will place the bands. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. So to begin, we're going to need 3 strap bands, and we're going to be using these 3 bands as our cap band for the design. And instead of twisting this band like we would do for normal cap bands, we're just going to stretch these 3 bands across these 3 center pins on one side of the Alpha Loom. So the 3rd pin, 4th pin, and 5th pin. Also, I just want to mention that the Rainbow Loom words on your Alpha Loom are facing towards you whenever you go to place bands, so make sure that's true. And yeah, for this first step it doesn't matter which way the words are facing, as long as you get these 3 bands on these 3 pins. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and start making the wristband part of the watch. So as you can see here in this example, I have double bands, which means I use 2 bands instead of 1. And you can do that for kind of a thicker, more heavier watch, but you can also just use regular single bands if you don't have a lot of bands or something like that, or you just prefer it. So I'm just going to go ahead and be doing that in this tutorial, just using single bands. And we're going to take 3 strap bands. We're going to put 1 going across these 2 3rd pins, 1 going across these 2 4th pins, and the last one going across these 2 5th pins. And when you've done that, you can get either your alpha comb or your regular hook. I'll be using my alpha comb for just regular looming. You're going to grab these bottom bands here and pull them up and over. Once you've done that, you can push these bands down, and now we're going to start the little pattern that we need to do to make the wristband strap part here. So the pattern is very simple. It's just like making any ordinary Alpha Loom bracelet. You're going to start by taking a connector band, which were the bands I described earlier that make the whole design possible, because they hold all the single chains together, and they're usually clear, and I'll be using clear in this tutorial. But basically you just take 1 connector band and stretch it across these 3 pins here where we've been placing all our bands, and just on one side of the Alpha Loom, so you don't take it and place it going all the way around here, just on one side. So just like our cap bands that we placed at the beginning. Then we're going to get 3 strap bands and we're going to place them the same way we did just a second ago, or just a few seconds ago. And we're going to take 1, place it going across these 3rd pins, 1 going across these 4th pins, and 1 going across these 5th pins. Just like this. Then we're going to get our hook, or our alpha comb. We're going to first grab this connector band and pull it up and over, and then we're going to loom all the bottom bands on both sides. And this is much easier with the alpha comb, or much quicker. And when you finish, you should just have 1 band on each of the pins you had rubber bands on originally. And basically you would repeat that pattern I just showed you until you make the strap about halfway long enough to fit around your wrist, or just a little bit before halfway. And if you got pretty much the exact number of bands you'll need, then you could use a little bit less than half of the bands you got out. And by half, I mean half of your strap bands. But I'll go ahead and show you the pattern one more time, and then I'll start showing you how to make the actual clock. Alright, let me just make camera real quick. There we go. So anyway, pattern is we take a connector band first and stretch it across these 3 middle pins, only on one side of the Alpha Loom. And these 3 middle pins are the 3rd pin, the 4th pin, and the 5th pin. Then we're going to get 3 strap bands, and we're going to stretch them across the 3rd, 4th, and 5th pin sets we have here. So we would take a strap band, place it going across these 2 3rd pins, another band going across these 2 4th pins, and the last one going across these 2 5th pins. Then we'll take our alpha comb or our hook, we'll grab this this connector band first, then loom all the bottom bands on both sides. And when you finish, you can push the bands down, and you'll just repeat that over and over until your bracelet, or I'm sorry, your little wrist strap here is a little bit less than halfway long enough to go around your wrist. Or if you got the exact number of bands you'll need, a little bit less than half of the strap bands you got out will be used. Alright. So, to begin making the clock, also use the pause button if you need more time, of course. So to begin making the clock, as you can see here, at the very first row of the clock, there are seven different bands down here. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how you do this. So we're going from using 3 pins on each side to using all 7. And it's very easy to go from 3 to 7. All you have to do is take your connector band and stretch it all the way across one side of the Alpha Loom. All 7 pins. Then all we have to do is just place the bands we need for this first row of the clock. So for the very first row, we're going to need to get some face bands and some number bands, so we don't need strap bands for this part. And here, down here at the very bottom, so now it's important where the rainbow loom words are, but anyway, down here at the very bottom, you're going to take a face band and place it. Then you're going to take a number band and place it on the second pins. Then you're going to take a face band and place it on the third pins. Take a number band and place it on the fourth pins. Then take a face band and place it on the fifth pins. A number band on the sixth. And face bands here on the 7th at the very top. So basically just a little pattern of face bands and number bands for this first row. Also, I just want to mention this, just like for the strap, you can use double bands for the face bands and the number bands. But in this tutorial, I'll be using double bands for just the face and single bands for the numbers. And I'll also be using double bands for the hands here. Anyway, now looming will be pretty much the same, except there's just one little difference. So first we're going to go ahead and get the connector band, pull it up and over. Now, instead of just having 7 bottom bands here, we only have 3. So we're just going to loom those bottom 3 here on this side, and then also those bottom 3 bands on the other side. And those were your strap bands that you just loomed up and over. Alright, now we're going to move to the next row of the clock. So unlike this design, I'm not going to have this little handband that you see here, because right here is the second row. I'm going to be showing you how to make this time in this tutorial. But if you have a template with you, then, and you have your own little time put on that, then you can just go with your template. But right now we're on the second row, and for the second row of the clock, it's a little different. Here in these first pins, we're going to take a number band and place it. Then, for the specific time that I'm doing, I'm going to have face bands all in between the first pins and the 7th pins. So if you're going to be doing the 9 o'clock time like I am, then you're just going to have number bands on the first pin and the 7th pins. And then all in between will be face bands. And I just realized something. We forgot to place the connector band. So quickly grab your connector band first. Just take all those bands off, put a connector band on, and then place all those bands. I do apologize, sorry about that. Alright, so for, just like I said, for the specific time that I'm doing, there aren't going to be any hand bands in the second row. And actually, if you're looking at a template, it's not the second row of the clock, it would be the second column of the clock. But that's if you have a template. If you don't worry about it. So anyway, now looming will be the exact same, except when you, after you grab your connector band, pull it up and over. Oh, and we're losing bands. There we go. After you loom your connector band, now we have 7 bottom bands on both sides. So you need to make sure you grab all of them. Goodness, this band keeps trying to escape here. And then make sure you get both sides here. Push those top bands that are remaining down. And now we're here in the third row or third column, depending on if you're looking at a template or if you're just following along with me. So for this next part, still depending on what kind of time you're using or doing, and if you have a template or not, if you're just following along with me, this row here will just have all face bands. Also, don't forget to place your connector band first. And if you're following along with exactly what I'm doing, you're just going to get face bands and place them on all 7 sets of pins here. And once you've placed your bands, you're going to first get your connector band with your hook or alpha comb, loom it up and over, and then loom the bottom bands on both sides. And be careful, because bands tend to want to escape the loom. There we go. Alright, now for this fourth row or column of the clock, everyone will be definitely placing at least one hand band in this part we're about to place, because we're right here in the very middle of the clock. So the very middle row or column, depending on if you have a template or you're following along with me. And as you can see here on my original clock design, here's the middle, and we're going to be placing some hand bands and some number bands. And face bands, of course. So, our number bands are going to go in the same places that they did in the previous rows. We're just going to have, don't forget your connector band. If I ever forget to mention placing a connector band, make sure you place a connector band at least. Alright, anyway. You're going to take your number band and place it on the first 2 pins here, so the first pins, and the 7th pins here at the top. Then, for sure, in the very middle, so here on these 4th pins, you're going to have hand bands, or a hand band, depending on if you're doing double bands or just a single band. And then, depending on what time you're doing, you'll either have some more hand bands in this row, or you'll just have face bands filling in the rest of the space. And if you're doing what I'm doing, the 9 o'clock time, 9 o'clock is going to be this band up here at the top, so the 7th pin. So that means we need to take our hand bands, and we're going to take 2, and we're going to put them on the 5th pins and the 6th pins. Then these last 2 couples of pins here, or 2 sets, we're just going to go ahead and fill those in with face bands. Once you've done that, you'll go ahead, take your alpha comb, grab the connector band, flip it up and over. You can also use your hook. Loom the bottom bands on both sides. Careful to make sure nothing comes flying off your loom. And push those bands down that remain. And now we're going to move on to the next row or column of the clock. So, if you're following along with me, the rest of the clock here will have hand bands in it, except for the very last row. Alright, so for this next row here, don't forget to get your connector band stretched across all 7 pins, one side. And for this part of the clock, it's just going to be face bands all the way through, except for the very middle, so the 4th pins here. The 4th pins will have a hand band on it. So if you're following along with me and doing the 9 o'clock, then you'll have a hand band here on the 4th pins here. If you have a different template and you're doing a different time, then just follow whatever you have on the template. Right. Once you finish, you're going to take your alpha comb or your hook, and we're going to do the regular looming process. Cat or connector band, and then all the bottom bands. Ooh, about to loom something I shouldn't. There we go. Then, for this next row or part, this row will have number bands in it. So we're going to put 1 number band here on the 7th pins. Don't forget that connector band. We're going to put 1 band here on the 7th pins, number band, and another number band here on the 1st pins. Right. Then, just like before, here in the middle we'll have a hand band, so here on the 4th pins, and then we'll just fill in the remaining empty spots here with face bands. Right, then with your alpha comb or hook, go ahead, loom all the bands as usual. Push the bands down, turn the loom around again. And now we're pretty much on the last full row, so that will be taking up the entire Alpha Loom of bands here in the clock. I just lost my train of thought. Oh goodness. Anyway, we're in the last full row, which will be taking like the full Alpha Loom part of the clock. Yeah, we'll go with that. Anyway, so start by getting your cat band first. And it'll be just like the very first row of bands we placed on our clock. Here on the outside, so here on the 1st and 7th pins, we'll have face bands. Then here on the 2nd and 6th pins, we'll have number bands. And if you're following along with my pattern, if you're following along with my pattern and you're doing the 9 o'clock, you'll have a handband here in the very middle, so the 4th pin's here. And then the last 2 little spots will have face bands in them. Alright, once again, looming, their hook or alpha comb. Nothing has changed in the little looming process here. Then, for this last row, we're going to need to add some of these bands here that will be getting loomed in towards the center, so then we can make our strap for the rest of the watch. So if you're using your alpha comb, make sure you have your regular hook nearby. And for this row, we do not need to add any connector bands. Alright, so we're going to need face bands here in the first row, here in the second row, here in the third row. Your last number band will be here in the 4th row, or the 4th pins. Then the 5th pins will have a face band, 6th pins will have a face band, and so will the 7th pins. There we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and loom all the bottom bands onto the top bands that we just placed. Just there won't be any connector band this time. And now we're going to do pretty much the most difficult thing for making this watch here. And that's getting all these bands in towards the center so that we only have 3 sets of pins using or that have bands on them. Alright, so what we need to do is we need to take down here at the bottom where our first and second rows of pins are, we're going to take the bands with our regular hook from the second pins down to the first pins. And you want to be careful when you do this because you don't want the bands to fall off your hook and you lose them, and then you gotta redo a little bit of that row, or even the worst case, the whole clock or bracelet again. That would stink. So be careful when you're doing this. Once you got the bands down, you're going to use your regular hook and just loom the bottom bands onto the bands you moved down. Once you finish that, you'll move these bands back up to the pins they were on before. Then we're going to do pretty much the same thing again, only for the 3rd pins and the 2nd pins. So we're going to take the bands from the 3rd pins and move them down to the 2nd ones. Then we'll loom the bottom band on these pins here. Then you can move these bands back up to the 3rd pins, and if I'm going too fast, just use the pause button. And once you finish that, you finished for the bottom half. Now you need to do the top half, where the 7th, 6th, and 5th pins are. So if it's easier for you, or you think it'll be easier, you can turn your Alpha Loom around, and it'll be just like what you did for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd pins. Except now it's kind of backwards. So we're taking these bands here on the 6th pins and bringing them up to the 7th pins, or down if you have your Alpha Loom turned around like that. Then we're going to loom the bottom bands on both pins here. Then we can move these bands back down or up to where they were. Then we're going to do the same thing for the 6th pins and the 5th pins. We're going to take the bands here on the 5th pins up or down depending on how you have your Alpha Loom. If you turned your Alpha Loom around to do this side, you'll be moving the bands down. If you just kept your Alpha Loom the way it was when you did the bottom, then you're moving the bands up. You're going to move them up here, or move them here to the 6th pins, and then loom the bottom bands here on the 6th pins. And once you've done that, you can bring these bands here on the 6th pins back to the 5th pins. And now you have only 3 sets of pins with bands on them. And now what we can do is we can start the rest of the wristwatch strap here. So, oh, if anyone hears that scratching, that's my cat trying to get in my room. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and get a connector band. Stretch it across these 3 rows, only on one side, and it's just going to be exactly the same way it was before. We're going to go ahead and get 3 strap bands. One's going to go across the 3rd pins, one is going to go across the 4th pins, and one is going to go across the 5th pins. Then we can get our Alpha Loom hook, or Alpha Comb, or a regular hook, and to that same looming process we had before. Loom the connector band over first, and then all the bottom bands. And basically just like what you did before, at the beginning, you're going to do it all again with the remainder of your strap bands, or until you make your bracelet long enough so that it will fit around your wrist. So I'm just going to go ahead and add one more row, and then I'll show you how to close off the watch design here. Alright, so to close off your little watch, you're going to need to have your clips nearby, all 3. And I would recommend using your regular hook for this step. Alright, anyway, to close the design off, make sure you've loomed any bottom bands or any connector bands, and you just have one band on a pin or no bands on a pin. And if you are using double bands for your strap bands, so you're using 2 instead of 1, then you'll just have 2 bands on each pin. But if you're like me and you're just using single bands, just 1 band. Alright, so anyway, we're going to use our hook, and we're going to take the bands on one side of our Alpha Loom and bring them over to the opposite side. So it doesn't matter which side you do. If you're left-handed and you hold your hook with your left hand, then you'll just bring the bands over to the right. If you're right-handed, you can bring the bands over to the left, or do whatever you want. Just make sure all the bands go directly across the loom to the other side. Alright, so here for example, here on the 3rd pin, I'm grabbing it from the left and bringing it over to the right. And whichever direction you bring your first band, you need to bring all the remaining bands. So here on the 4th pins, I also need to grab the left side and bring it over to the right. And then same thing for the 5th pins here. Use the pause button if you need to. But once you have all your bands on one side of your Alpha Loom, we're now going to attach our clips to these bands. So one clip is going to go to all the bands on one pin. So for example, we have this clip here we're just going to attach it to all the bands here on this third pin. There we go. Then this next clip will go on the fourth pin band. Be nice if I could get it on there. There we go. And the last clip will go here on the fifth pin. And once your clips are attached to all the bands, you can go ahead and just take those bands off the loom. Keep them on the clips though. And you don't really need your Alpha Loom. And now you should have your watch design. And I have mine backwards, here we go. And now what you need to do is attach these clips to the cap band here on the end. Or the cap bands, because we placed 3 bands here at the end. So we just take a clip, attach it to these bands here. Same with the other 2. And there we go. So as you can see here, my clock watch here, my square watch, is, well, it's a little bit too small for me to wear it as a bracelet, but once you finish yours, you can put your bracelet on, and I'll just go ahead and put on this other one. And, oops, it's upside down. And, bam! Then, you have your Alpha Loom square watch. So, now I guess it's time for the outro. So, I would like to thank you for watching my tutorial. Hopefully you were able to bear with some of the inconveniences here in the tutorial, or any problems, or just the length, because I was trying to make it so that if you're using a template or you want to do a different time on your clock, then I just tried to explain how you would do that, and hopefully didn't make the tutorial too confusing. If it did, sorry about that. But anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say for this tutorial, other than I also have another video linked in the description to where you can see a template showcase. So basically I show you the template for the Alpha Loom design here, instead of explaining how you make the bracelet all the way through like I did in this video. And also I'll have a link in the description to where you can download the template for you to edit and stuff like that. Also I'll have a link in the description for this watch's tutorial. And, well, that would be pretty much it. So, other than thanks for watching, and bye!